say it twice. So I'm Chris Wilson. Wilson Organic Farms. We're located in the southwest part of Wisconsin, about an hour southwest of here. We're a large family farm, large family. So I would be the seventh generation on our farm. I farm with 7 other cousins and immediate family members. My dad is Keith Wilson. He's in the audience there. He took the farm, started transitioning the farm to organic in 1996. We sold we're a dairy farm as well as a crop farm. We sold our first organic milk to Organic Valley in 2000. Since then, we've continued to evolve, and currently we milk about 500 dairy cows, have about 3,500 acres, about 2,600 of that is row crops. Just kind of a contrast, I thought, Brett's presentation was awesome. I mean, that's the gold standard for raising, soybeans. Just an awesome presentation, doing just an amazing job. He's located probably 5B, maybe 6A. I looked at this morning, it was right on the line. I'm gonna say 6A, just because it spreads it out a little bit more. We're more 5A, so what does that mean? It means that there's about a 5-degree average difference in temperature throughout the year, spring and fall, and that makes a difference in a lot of the systems that we're looking at. Some of the trade-offs, some of the growing season lengths, some of the yield differences. So in our system, because we have that livestock at the center of our operation, we have a lot of forages as sort of our core production within our cropping system. So when we're looking at things, soybeans are certainly a part of that. They're a setup crop for how we establish our alfalfa stands, but they aren't necessarily the core of our operation either. They are not necessarily the thing that we are, cash flowing everything else. It is part of that overall system. It has benefits of just rotational benefits, breaking up the soil. It has nutrient balancing benefits. But again, when we look at our overall acres, about 40% of them are in hay crops. That includes the establishment year. About a quarter of it's in corn, and about a fifth of it is in soybeans, and the remainder is in small grains. And on the left, that's kind of a list of everything that we have on our farm. So why do we have soybeans in rotation? I guess I touched on this a little bit. Some of the balancing aspects, but the other aspect in our farm is that we're pretty busy doing a lot of other things. So, especially in that late May window, we've got hay crops to put in. We try to get corn in, part of our corn crop established before we do first crop hay. So we got cultivation passes that we're doing at that same time. Soybeans are a nice crop for us because we're either no-tilling on part of them, or we're delaying that soybean planting into June. So typically, for us, we look to plant soybeans, first week, second week of June, depending on the year. So this is kind of a rotation, and this is just the rotations that soybeans, the different soybean rotations that we have. So our more traditional one would just be corn with a cultivated soybean and then back into alfalfa. We've started, for about 15 years, we have no-till soybeans at their various volumes. About half of our soybeans today are no-till. So that's historically, that's been more of that second row there. And what we do there is we'll a lot of times have a 4-H corn, so it's either corn silage or snaplage, and we'll follow that corn with the rye planting. Usually it's right behind the planter, or right behind the combine, and a tillage pass if we can. A lot of times that tillage pass is a Limkin. We've gone to some deep ripper just because it seems to shred that some of that residue, but if it's corn silage, it's a little bit easier. If it's snaplage, we will have to sometimes go in with a mulcher and mulch that stock about a couple days after we take the snaplage off, just to let that stock air out and dry down. And then we'll hit it with either a deep ripper or a limpkin. The limpkin sometimes, depending on how green that snaplage is, it will plug. So, excuse me, it will plug up. So in that case, then we'll go in with the deep ripper, which tends to handle that and disc it a little bit better. The other rotations that we've started to add in the last couple of years are those bottom two, and that third one would be going from corn silage to wheat. So similar fall practices. Then in the spring we will oftentimes top dress that wheat with a chicken litter. Usually it's just like a half a ton, but we've seen about a 10 bushel impact on the wheat yields from that spring top dressing. The bottom one, which I'll touch on a little bit, is we started to double crop winter barley. So again, similar, and both of those, so on the wheat one, we'll plant rye following the wheat, and then no-till the beans in the third year. And then on the bottom one, we double crop that soybeans right after we take the winter barley off, which I'll kind of get into each of those a little bit in detail. Cultivated soybeans, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time in these. Brett did an amazing job. Like I said, he's the gold standard. We have a lot to learn on that side of it still. Here's kind of our passes. This is an example of one of the fields that we still often will cover crop it, but it's a lot later. And then we'll limpkin that rye in usually in the first week of May, do a pass, and then plant soybeans. This field we did run a burner on it, we tined it, we cultivated it. Again, I won't get too far into that. So no-till soybeans. For us, this is about half of our soybeans. Again, a lot of times we're doing it after corn snaplage or a winter wheat crop. We're establishing that rye, we're making sure that we're getting that rye in a timely manner to really get that fall growth and that spring growth. We're also a lot of times targeting on our higher fertility ground. That rye mat and thickness, it's nutrient sensitive, so if you don't have that good base, it's going to be thinner, it's going to open up in the spring more, it's not going to have those thick leaves, and it's going to allow for more weed escape. So I'll jump to this. So a lot of times when I look at what we've had success and where we haven't had success, it comes down to that fall growth. So if we've got a planting that we can get that rye in by September 21st or sooner, that's going to almost every year give us that 800 growing degree days by the end of the year. And from that standpoint, if we can hit that 800, we are successful basically 9 out of 10 years with the no-till system. If we roll the dice and plant after October 1st, it's 50-50. If you've got really fertile ground, maybe a really clean soil mat, you can make it work, but it's a coin toss. It's a roll of the dice. So that's the kind of the fall we get in. So then in the spring, a lot of times I'll go out and I'll do biomass measures the third week of April. So this is an example of three different planting dates. We've got one that was October 3rd. In the fall, this is 2021. Fall 2021 was the orange line, which you can see we had a really nice fall that year. We had an awesome awesome October. So we got a lot of growing degree days that fall, which allowed for the October 3rd planting date to have a really thick stand. So when I went out and and did sort of a biomass cover. About 90% of that ground was canopied with the rye on April 23rd. We had an October 20th planting of that. That dropped down to 48%. So at that point, April 23rd or April 22nd, that one, half the ground is still exposed. And what's important about that last half of April? Well, as Dr. Ryan had in his presentation, that's when a lot of those weeds in our area decide to come out of hibernation from the winter. So if there's not good ground cover, if there's not that sun blockage, you're going to start to get foxtail and other things that are going to start to germinate. That last one is 5 days later, and you can see just even on that 5-day difference, there's about a 20% drop. So if I'm grading this, and you got to make that decision in late April, early May, that's a no-go. Like if I look at that, that field, at that point you pretty much just plan to work that under and cultivate. This one you got to be cautious. So when you evaluate it, it can work, but it's going to have to be an extremely clean field, and that will probably require potentially a high residue cultivation at some point. This one you're looking good. So that's the field here that when we look at, we had a field day October 3rd, and this is what the mat looked like. I'm trying to remember the dates. I think this was actually a picture from July, where the beans are up and established. This was from our field day on the 3rd of that same field. Our only passes in these fields are weed zappers, so there was a pass about 5 days prior to this field day. We did one more pass before before there was full closure on that row, I think about a day or two after that. The one challenge with the no-till system is that the weed zappers, when the beans are shorter, they'll arc down to that mat. So if you're gonna try to run a weed zapper through a no-till system, it either needs to, contrary to what a lot of the weed zappers say, you have to do it when it's wet out in order to prevent that mat from catching on fire, or you gotta let it get up to about thigh high on the beans with that good closure, so that it's not arcing through the beans to the mat. So again, that's just a picture there. So the one thing this year that we had a little bit more of is, and I think there's been a lot of discussion on this, is that the weed zapper, maybe wasn't totally killing the plant. So this plant was weed zapped, part of it's dead, part of it's still alive. Whether it makes viable seed, I think is something that's being discussed, but I thought that was interesting. What do we use for a weed zapper? We have a Lasco weed zapper. It's a 30-footer. We like the Lasco because it doesn't require as much horsepower, so we can throw it on a 260 horsepower tractor. You don't need 350 horsepower tractors to run it through. So some of the same cultivating tractors we can use for running our zapper. It works really well on ragweed, which we do have a fair amount of. It doesn't do much for grasses. It will fire them, but they're still gonna suck up moisture, and a lot of times that yield loss has already been determined by the in-row foxtail. It really can't save a failed crop. I think if you've got a lot of problems, with weed pressure early, you can't necessarily rely on that weed zapper to save that field necessarily. I do think where there's a lot of success with the weed zapper is, especially with that ragweed, is if you've got, you've got a field that has it in it, but it isn't pervasive, it can really help that top end yield, and really allow that crop to shine. So switching to kind of that third rotation that we're starting to implement on our farm, we grow winter wheat after corn silage crop. We take that straw, or wheat and straw off. For us, that's usually about that second, third, fourth week of July. Just depends on varieties and everything else. We'll go in and throw about 6,000 gallons of liquid manure on it. And then we waited, we often wait until about that first week of September. So it is fallow for most of August. We'll run a VT across it at that point and stick rye in the ground. This is a picture from this fall. This last fall, we planted the rye on September 6th. The mat that you're looking at is October 16th. So that's perfect. If you can get a mat that looks like that, it's probably going to look great in April. You're really setting up in good shape. The last rotation that we have that we're starting to experiment a little bit more with is pulling winter barley into our rotation. So we're a little bit further north, and winter wheat, like I said, we're not taking winter wheat off usually until the second week of July at the earliest, which for us, our first hard freeze date is roughly the first week of October. It just isn't enough time to get that soybean in the ground and have a successful double crop. But winter barley is about 3 weeks sooner. So in that case, we are able to get the barley off and get it planted by the end of June. I mean, my goal is usually about the 21st of June. Is kind of what we put on paper. This last year, it got pushed out mainly because the barley wasn't ready. It was a little bit of a rough winter, which we thought the barley wouldn't even make it through the winter, but it did. It was just slow to come out in the spring. And then we had a really cold April, which held it back, and that stretched it out. So we decided, especially with $35 soybeans, that at that point it is worth sticking the bee in the ground and going. So we planted June 28th. We got rain, I think, that night. So the beans were out of the ground, I think, within a couple days. We didn't do a time pass. We didn't do a blind pass. We did, after emergence, run the rotary hoe through, and that was our only cultivation until about, about 3 weeks later we ran, we had a fair amount of residue on that, so that's one thing I think for us that not doing a whole lot of double cropping that we have a learning curve on, or made a mistake is not getting enough of that residue buried from the barley, and that didn't allow us to tine it, which we normally was our blind pass, and then usually a second pass of that because it was plugging up the tiner, and we couldn't run a regular cultivator through because it was similar. So we very slowly ran the buffalo cultivator through it. That was our only cultivation pass, and then we did weed zap it in August to knock out the ragweed. So there's some pictures on that. So this was planted last fall. The keys on the winter barley is you gotta get planted early. And so we planted after corn silage. It was planted September 24th for us. And that led to just a pretty nice stand in the spring. That was headed out by May 25th. Was it perfectly clean? No, but again, we only had three cultivation passes on that. We had the rotary hoe and one buffalo cultivator pass, and then a weed zapper. So not super active, no additional, we basically planted the seed and we had the soil fertility to work from there. Unfortunately, we did get an early frost, which when it happened, we thought we had a pretty good bean crop coming, and we thought we were going to lose maybe half the yield to the early frost. The beans were still completely green when it happened. It was probably about a V6, V6.5 freeze date. But at the end of the day, we still ended up with about a 50 bushel average on those double crop beans, which actually was better than most of our full season beans. One last thing that we're playing around with is relay cropping a little bit. So we did try that on a test plot. I think we used a drill for doing the interseeding in the first week of May. If we do it, we're going to try it again this coming year. We're going to do 30-inch rows. The beans seemed to do fine, but they were really dense, so I think we had a lot of disease pressure, a lot of small beans. Just quickly, looking at our farm's history, so we kind of keep field by field yield data on all of our farms, and we grid soil sample all of our farms, and I pulled yield history from 2018 2022, and I looked at our yields, yield difference from our farm average over those years, and I mapped it with our soil phosphorus levels. And on our farm, that we suffer from phosphorus deficiency pretty prolifically. It's probably our biggest challenge on soybean yields and even wheat yields. So farms that tested, if we look at this chart, farms that tested on the low side of phosphorus, so if you got a P1 that sub 15 or a P2 sub 25 in that bucket, it was basically a 10 bushel impact. Farms that were between 15 and 20, they saw about a 10 bushel gain, and then farms that were kind of meeting Leia's criteria or her presentation that were over 20, that were more in that medium or higher category, we saw a 10 bushel positive impact. So when we look at our overall rotation, we have a lot of dairy manure, so we're able to use that as a large nitrogen source, but we grow a lot of hay too. So when we look at that overall picture, we're pulling out a lot of phosphorus, and that's depleting in our soil, so that's why we're bringing in chicken litter, even though we don't necessarily need it for nitrogen or potassium. I guess from some of the things that I guess are hard lessons learned over the years, I think the thing that we keep gravitating towards on beans that are cultivated is just plant later. It seems like if you wait an extra week, you can take out a couple passes. You really don't get too much further ahead on time because that bean is so aggressive getting out of the ground when it warms up, and then you just don't have the weed pressure, especially on foxtail for us. So planting later is definitely a big one. We use the tiner a lot. I think for our blind passes, we don't rotary hoe maybe as much as others. Maybe we need to go back to the drawing board on that a little bit, but you really can't tine too aggressive, it seems like. It seems like you can set that tiner, what you'd think would be over aggressively, and the bean still is fine, and you can knock out a lot of those pesky weeds that are in the row. If you have an escape field where you got a mess in the middle of June, we've rarely regretted replanting it. I mean, we probably regret more often not replanting than replanting, and that goes for corn as well. I think that's a really important takeaway from our farm. And then I think, you know, coming back to the no-till and why it's part of our system, we use it as a diversification tool. And really over the years, we've seen our cultivated beans outperform it some years and then underperform in other years. It really depends on what that weather is each year to year, and there's going to be a lot of variability there. Years where it's extremely wet in the spring, the no-till system thrives. The years that it's a bit of a challenge is when it's drier out. So that diversity in our system with the no-till, I think, is why it's a big part of our system.